Okay, so today is June 5th, 2022, and we're continuing our Desiderata Extinctionati meeting. There's no set agenda today, but actually Gary wanted to, pose the question regarding the flippening and how, the discussion first about if you want to talk, Gary, but don't look up if that covered what the flippening covered, what he wrote about, and considering everything that's happened, the war with Ukraine, um, certain diseases, the economies of the world, um, does that already eclipse the flippening? And so for me, I think, with the way Hugh posed the flippening, it was a way to catch people's attention, and that in the way the world is going. But the way things are now, I do think that our attention is going to these things that are happening right here, right now, right? The events that are happening are eclipsing the flippening. And actually, I'd say since Hugh passed, things started ratcheting up a little bit, right? I don't think Hugh even foresaw these events happening so soon, and I think the flippening was a way to prepare us for that. But it looks like it's happening right here, right now. I mean, of course, it's not happening quickly in some places, but we're starting to see it. And but what does everyone think, or any thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually. That just Hugh proposing the flippening, preparing just even us for what began to unfold fairly well at the same time that he went. That's an interesting point actually. The other thing that's just occurred to me too is regarding the current world events and that is the importance of not allowing that to be an all-consuming distraction from, I guess the central issue of attending to your own state of awareness. Yeah, it's very easy to get immersed in all this great massive unfolding of events and lose yourself in that rather than maintaining an awareness of your center. Yeah, it's just those two things came to mind just then.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Gary, because there are a lot of distracting things that take away our attention, and there's a lot of whipping up of fear which is nothing new. But yeah, so thanks for the reminder. And I think Lord Hugh did caution us about that, not to get too involved or attached in like mainstream media, listening all the time, the fear mongering, even being interested so much in politics, thinking that whomever we vote or that voting uh, makes a whole lot of difference. Maybe in our local communities it does, but in the bigger scheme of things, like the national leaders, I think it would just be makyo to get burnt up about current events.
Yeah, I guess uh, there also seems to be what could be perceived as a kind of a desperation on the part of these people to um, that maybe their distractions aren't working well enough because they seem to be bringing on many of them at the same time. Now they're getting multiple major distractions at the same time. That if the war wasn't enough, then we had to have the food shortage, then we had to have the inflation, then we had to have great fiascos with guns in America, and indiscreet statements being made that could provoke China, and it's as though um, there's this mass bombardment, um, which on the one side of it, yeah, abortion, of course, Tolstoy, of course, yeah. Um, um, of course, they're all uh, most of those are valid things. Uh, but on the other side of it, it just sort of seems rather suspicious that there's such a concatenation of them, all at once. Um, and I guess you have to ask what's the agenda here. Do you go down a conspiracy theory pathway about, what these naughty elites have got in mind, and why they're trying to completely bamboozle us with all of these distractions all at once? Or is there no conspiracy theory at all? You could go. Hugh and I discussed the um, the idea of the Kali Yuga, which is the fourth age, the final age of the great cycle, which is characterized by chaos and a great acceleration in time and general decay and all this kind of thing. So you could be looking at this from a sort of a mythological sort of Eastern apocalyptic um, uh, cycle in time as aligning with what is going on at the moment. Um, I mean, possibly what we need to be looking at is what are the lessons for us as people who are trying to retain our focus on what's real and what's authentic, um, and not get led up the garden path. So uh, yeah, I guess that's just my thought at the moment is uh, just navigating that space of preserving not just your own sanity but um, uh, uh, your own state of awareness during all this.
Well, isn't it the nature of this Moloch machine to self-destroy? And I've never been somebody who got much interest in conspiracy theories because everything is really, or and maybe but I really don't like the cabal stories of a group of people who are trying to do this and that. There is plenty of organizations that got their self-interest at heart and that are trying to help each other. That's, I'm not denying that there are such groups, but what I mean, I don't go into this kind of thing of there's this group of people who are maneuvering so that we're going this way and that way. I really think, and I read something, I can't remember which article it was, somebody posted a very interesting article, I read it about that, and it's like it's written in the making of this meta alien cortex construction, that machine, this enormous system that we're in, that it's self-destroying itself. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, what you're reminding me of is a conversation we had a few days ago where I think we touched on that. And I'm just trying to bring back what we were saying, which, yeah, we remember we were talking about China. Oh, okay. Yeah. Look, I don't know if this might be getting off the track a little bit, but it might lead us back to it. So I'll try and get it out. Which is Sophie and I were having a discussion a few days ago about the lockdowns in Shanghai, which have continued for quite a long time, and I said made the comment that. A lot of the commentary about that seemed to be rather superficial. That people were saying, "Oh, it's just these Chinese are just such slaves to their own ideology that they've got this zero COVID policy and they're going to cling to it and uphold it to the bitter end." As though they're remarkably stupid people who just would do that to their own detriment. And maybe they would to a degree, but I felt that there probably was a deeper reason why they were going through the exercise of locking down Shanghai for so long. And Sophie and I were talking about that. And another video popped up on YouTube where this was being discussed, and in that video they suggested that actually no, that the reason why Shanghai was being locked down was that Xi Jinping was attempting to reconstruct himself along Maoist lines and reassert a much more authoritarian state of affairs. And what he was doing was using Shanghai as a test case, that if he could get away with very rigid control there in 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 a city that was probably one of the sort of more free, more liberal cities in China, that if he could get away with that degree of control there, he could get away with it in the rest of the country and then roll out. I guess probably the idea behind it was he probably felt that China was getting a bit too much Western influence and wanted to roll it back to an earlier time in terms of his power and all the rest of it. And, you know, Sophie and I were talking about that, and I still had the feeling that even that wasn't a reason that was really getting to the crux of the matter. And I'll just have to go a little bit slowly here because I've got to refer back to a couple of notes. I can't keep this all in my mind. What did we talk about? Uh, uh, the Yeah, Sophie was mentioned the idea of absurdity. Is that why are countries just descending into this case, into this state of self-destructive absurdity? And I think that's where we got onto a comparison of both China and the EU. In the case of Shanghai, they appear to be deliberately and very forcefully pursuing a line of action which was absurd, that it wasn't achieving anything. And because, for instance, Shanghai is the major economic center in China, that the Chinese were actually threatening crashing their own economy by keeping such a large center closed down for such a long time. And in thinking of that, realizing that this is exactly the same process that the EU is currently engaged in, that apparently they're on this bitterly determined path to deliberately crash the European economies as well. And then I guess we got towards the end. Our point was, well, what was the agenda behind these two major players on the world stage apparently wanting to deliberately crash their economies? And this is just getting back to where we were a minute ago, with Sophie was just talking about the Moloch, which was that, we then started to say, well, hey, this could be out of the realm of human beings, that we're not actually talking about human beings now. We're talking about the machine. We're talking about systems which have their own momentum and their own agenda. The machine's not a human being. It's kind of this huge system that has kind of taken over humanity in its own right, even though humanity constitutes it. And the point is, we seem to be going through these stages where the system is successful for a while, which it has been during the 20th century, but it gets into a state of kind of diminishing returns for the amount of effort it puts into trying to expand itself. So, and this comes out in terms of energy and economic maneuverings and all the rest of it, where we end up in the stage where we are now, which is a kind of economic paralysis because nothing else can be done with the twisted up monetary system. And then so you go from that stage of diminishing returns to the stage of the system beginning to defeat its own purpose. In other words, everything it tries to do to make things better just makes them worse. And we also seem to be in that situation now. And then the final stage is also now becoming apparent, where the system starts to destroy itself, where it in its efforts to keep itself going, it actually ends up being self-destructive. And that was where we sort of came back to the example of China in the EU. Is that an example of the system becoming, in its end stage, in its dying throes, becoming so dysfunctional and twisted that it's actually destroying itself? Yeah, so that was basically the discussion we had, and we finished off with the example of the poem. What was the name of the poem, Sophie? Do you remember? I've forgotten. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the one with Ozymandias. If I'm probably not pronouncing that correct. The King
I'm
of
looking for
Dust.
it now. 1 second. I know you. It was Aussie. Oh, I'll put a link when I'll get it. I have a.
Yeah. Just put it up because the
Uh,
poem has got just a little segment in it.
it's
Hang on,
Ozymandias
try.
by Shelley. I met a
Yeah, hang
traveler
on.
from an antique land. Yeah,
That's right. That's the one. Yeah.
I'll find it and I'll post it.
Maybe I can
Hang on.
comment. Maybe I can
Yeah.
Yeah,
comment while you
go
find
ahead.
the
Yeah.
poem. Yeah,
Oh,
because
hang on. Here it is.
yeah,
Here it is. I'll just read it
okay,
out to a stone
yeah,
before you, and then you can have the
yeah,
stage if you like. It was about, this mythical king who had fallen from grace and ended up being the king of nothing. And it seemed to me to always have a point to make about the kind of, I think about the pretensions of elites in the world we're living in at the moment, where they seem to be so desperate to hang on to power, but they don't realize that they're creating a world that's just going to be a wasteland. So what the hell is it do they think that they're going to be in control of? And the poem ends with this stone bust of the king on a pedestal, and it says, "And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." In other words, he's just left to be king of absolutely nothing at the end of the day, and all the pretensions came to nothing. And it just seemed to be an appropriate thing at the time when Sophie and I were talking to finish the conversation with that. But anyway, I'll let you go on, Torstein.
Yeah, I think it makes sense absolutely to there are some signs that look like the EU is sort of self-collapsing and things are not making sense, etc., etc. Or from another perspective, they are too good to be true. And when it's like that, it's it's often too good to be true. So it's not true. So I think the first thing we have to remember when the EU is sort of cutting up its body with a bread knife and sort of chopping off its limbs and stuff, which is it's doing now in an economic sense. We have to remember that the EU, the Europe, is not a country, not a union, not a continent. It's just a big slave of America. You have the U.S. empire, and they decide everything, right? And just like they decide everything that goes on in Ukraine. It's not like whatever the name of the leader in the comedian in Ukraine is. It's not like he is running the show, right? He's just a puppet for
He's a
Washington, right?
puppet, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like when Germany, the massive economy of Germany, which is the sort of the engine of the European Union, is sort of doing totally counterintuitive and self-harming actions, saying that, oh no, we don't want any energy from Russia. That's not them talking. That's basically America talking, and they're just moving their lips, right? So the way I see it, America knows very well now, geopolitically, they are losing the grip of the global economy. They're losing the petrodollar. The petrodollar, for those who don't know, is an artificial way to prop up the economy or the currency of America by forcing everyone to trade oil and gas in the dollar. So basically, you have to, if let's say Finland wants to buy oil from Russia, they have to first buy dollars from America and then pay the Russians in dollars. Of course, the Chad move of Putin and Russia, as soon as this war started in Ukraine, was to say, yeah, but, of course, sure, you can buy oil and gas from us. You just have to pay in rubles, right? And for somebody who has studied geopolitics, that was, okay, yeah, I see what you do there. Very smart. And yeah, but I think it's important that we don't sort of choose sides and look at this like a football game or something, football match. But it's geopolitics, and the rules of the game have been around for hundreds of years, and some of the players are clever playing it, but yeah, if you focus down on a detail like what is Spain doing or what is Germany doing, it doesn't make any sense if you don't see the big picture. I think where America is ruling everybody, and we are their slaves.
Yeah, I just before I came on the meeting, there's listening to a thing on YouTube which could be relevant. Hang on, I'll just read out what it is in case anyone else wants to do it. The channel is called Redacted. and it's a pretty well a right-leaning thing. And their edition, they're having a conversation with a fellow called Larry Johnson, who is an ex-CIA person. This is dated 4th of June on Redacted. One of the things that one of the questions that was asked to this fellow was, in terms of American interference and action in countries overseas, how well scripted is it, and how intentional is it, the things that they were doing? Were they really sitting down and working through what they were trying to do, what likely outcomes could come of it, and what their responses were going to be? Um, and it was interesting. This fellow's replies were a little bit contradictory. On the one hand, he said, no, there's not much of that goes on. There's not a lot of serious planning, thinking through the consequences of what America's doing, like he was citing, Afghanistan and Iraq and all these interferences that America's been engaging in for a long time. Um, uh, and because I haven't finished it, but I'm just didn't so I can't sort of conclude what the guy said, but he did say, yeah, they do script this to some extent, but the impression I had was not as much as you might think. And I'm wondering whether that's coming out now in terms of Ukraine, that they have scripted this to a certain extent, but haven't thought it through far enough, and it's now backfiring for them, giving undesirable results such as the undermining of the petrodollar. Whereas, I don't know, just my personal impression is that the Russians seem to have been just taking a very quiet attitude, and that they have thought through this very carefully and know what they're doing. I don't know. Has anyone got a comment about that? It does seem to be a bit of a disparity. The US seems to be behaving strangely and not indicating that careful thought has preceded what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Russia is behaving very carefully and planned, relatively. But I also think that America has known for a long time that it would come to an end for their dominance, for their economic dominance, and for the dollar hegemony. So I don't agree that was a total surprise for them that Russia would pull the petro currency card. I think all of these things were known before the war started, and but I still think that the main sort of headline here is that this is an apocalyptic war for the end of the US/Western hegemony in the world. So it's not just like some kind of border clashes down in Eastern Europe. This is like where America ends and China and Russia takes over. So that's kind of the only thing that makes this interesting, there, because it's like you've had like 2, 3, 4, 500 years of Western dominance, discovering America and ruling China and all of these things, and now the whole thing goes to the east, and the east takes over, basically.
I'm wondering whether is it any more a matter of nations? In other words, given the extraordinary influence of transnational corporations and extremely wealthy people that the sort of end of the American dominance it's just sort of like a symptom of the power structure being focused in a different place rather than an actual different country, or instead of Russia and China being sort of dominant instead of America. That might happen, but it's just sort of symptomatic of uh, people in wealthy and powerful positions and large corporations just sort of moving their allegiance from one place to the other, and that they are that is the real influence and not the actual nations themselves.
Yeah, I think you can see what Israel is doing. So Israel is definitely moving their funds and their money into Asian economies. So and not being anti-Semite, but some people say that those guys know about money and how money works, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah. I think there was somebody else on this call who is going to say, no, I'm not an anti-Semite, but I've got some things to say, but I won't talk for you. Um, yeah, sorry, I just not quite sure where to take the discussion from there. Has anyone else got a
Yeah, but to come back to what we were saying at the start, if I may add, is that we're still kind of witnessing a machine, a Moloch, a beast that is the system or civilization that has been built, and we know how, and we've discussed that at length with you and after him, and we can see that the measures that this civilization is taking to protect itself, whether it's through what we're talking about, conflict or money, are bringing it to its end, and it's shooting itself in the foot. But it still can only act with its own intelligence, that form of cleverness that is not wise. And that's what we're witnessing. Like everybody's saying, why is Europe doing this? Like, why are they doing? Because the system is rigged for these sort of measures to be taken, because that's not even, I don't think it's even any wise guys in his office who's deciding that. It's the way things are rigged in the system. So it's taken out of anybody's, I was going to say control, but it's another form of control. It's a control. The civilization itself is acting like an entity. Do you see what I mean?
Well, see, this comes back to what we were saying earlier about faulty and the kind of activist agenda is that the forces that are acting are just so huge by comparison that it's you have to seriously ask yourself whether what they're doing is having any effect at all. Actually, just thinking back, Sophie, towards the end of that conversation with Faulty, where he said that what was important was to be at the end to have some to have some grace, uh, and I think this is where his spiritual understanding must be coming out. It's because this brought up in my mind two things that Hugh was on about. One was you know, the fact that you would want to do the right thing, not because of any result that you might get or any influence that it might have, but simply because doing the right thing is I don't know, it seems cheap to say fulfilling, but you know, you just simply do it because it's the right thing. But also, also as well, his notion of ataraxia in the end times, and I think that's probably what Roger meant when he used that word, that grace. Sophie, do you remember exactly what he said at that point towards the end? Because
I remember very well when he used the word grace. Used it in the context of talking about a culture of resistance, but I can't remember the whole context. Now, I just want to say to other people who might not know that we had a conversation with Gary, a few days ago, to give him all the info we had on the Ark so that he could do what he wanted with it, because we were going to meet with him in sometimes in February, March, after Hugh passed away, and Gary and I were too tired and we just couldn't do it, so we cancelled the meeting. But we got an appointment with him a few days ago, and we had a quick we had a talk with him and Blondie, and we kind of unloaded everything we knew about the Ark and the people, the contacts. It's going to be followed up, and we just told him that we don't have the backbone and the knowledge and the capacity to develop this thing. And so we had, we mostly talked about the Ark, but then he went on to more general subjects. And at the end, it was actually very inspiring because, yes, he used the word grace. I wish it was an unrecorded meeting. So I didn't take many notes.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm annoyed because I was taking notes.
He was very, very inspiring, actually.
He was very inspiring. I think we brought him out, Sophie, because I was, well, I mean, I genuinely did want to tell him how impressive he is as a person when you get into a private conversation with him. That it's quite a different persona to what you see if you just get onto a YouTube video and watch him giving a fire and brimstone speech to the troops, and then at the end of it saying, "Hey, and now that the situation's hopeless, please go to jail for the cause." But there's a whole other Roger that I think generally people aren't aware of. And during the conversation that we were having, uh, just one of the things I was wanting to say to him was, it might be beneficial for him in overcoming people's. I mean, a lot of people have a pretty negative opinion of him, and it might be a way to overcome that if he revealed himself more as the person he really is, rather than the sort of activist recruiting fellow for or how can I put it? Like trying to get the troops incredibly enthusiastic and go along with the next action or the next thing that's in mind. And yeah, I think at that point, because the conversation had gone in that direction of his, I mean, really, to be honest, I think it, it, uh, he is a person who is a spiritual master himself, and uh, you know that's an aspect of him that it probably needs to come out at this stage. And I think it's talking that along those lines was what must have got him onto talking about grace in the end times. And he was actually talking about a new religion, and I think by that he probably meant a return to a more spiritual perspective on what was happening. So yeah, and it is a great pity that neither Sophie and I took down sufficient details to to sort of regurgitate that for everybody, because it was probably right at the end of our conversation was probably the most important thing that was said. But I think we were sort of a little bit in awe at that moment and didn't fully sort of capture it, unfortunately.
Yes, because I'm looking at my notes now, and I'd written the word grace really big, and then just after that, I'd written send the manifesto because he wanted to, he wanted to have another look at it. But yeah, I think we were, because you told him, if my memory is good, you told him what you have to say. You're saying, you need to appear as you are when we have a conversation like that. Like the Roger that people need to see, and I think that gave him wings to start, and he got really inspired. And then I stopped writing. I stopped taking notes. I just listened.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the trouble with notes is that they're in inverse proportion to the importance. Like, if something really important going on, you can't spare the time to be scribbling notes. You're paying attention. And then if there's something not important going on, you've got plenty of time to sit there and write it all down, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I think
Yeah, I
he'd like
guess,
to consider.
but
He'd like to consider the ARG. He's going to pursue with his crowd, with our documents. He's going to pursue the idea in the States. So I mean, it was a positive interaction. Sorry, Torstein, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
no, it's fine. But I guess, like grace or not, or whatever those notes were, I think it's still a question for any ecological or climate activist or community, whether or not you're going to fight to prolong the reign of this industrial civilization, which Faulty is doing, has been doing, always has been doing, by trying to make it some kind of better or a light version of the industrial machine, and the other side, which is working to end industrial civilization as soon as possible, which turns out to be the best solution for everybody living on this planet, all the other species and stuff. So it seems to me, although I was very keen to follow Faulty and XR at the beginning, back and forth, but I kind of strongly supported them sometimes along the way. But in the larger picture, they are sort of cheering on the major team, which is Team Industrial Civilization, which is bringing everything to a grinding halt. So yeah, I think in retrospect, I don't support him. I don't support XR. I think.
Isn't
well,
it an absolutely tiny minority of people, even at this point, who are capable of questioning the necessity of industrial civilization? I mean, I think it's such an obscure idea that I don't know. I never met anybody who has this idea outside of like a tiny minority of like nutters on the internet. Which, like, for me, I kind of take for granted now, as Torsten was saying, the end of industrial civilization would be the best thing, and the sooner it happens, the better, albeit the consequences of that are going to be extremely unpleasant for a lot of us. But yeah, isn't this like the most, does Roger or anyone else in that sort of mainstream thing, do they have any idea about, industrial civilization being a bad thing? Or, do we take for granted that you can question the existence of civilization because we all talk to each other and we all have our issues with it? But when you talk to like the most enthusiastic environmentalists in the normie world, the concept of anything outside of windmills and solar saving the world seems to be complete anathema to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that Roger's in contradiction. Like for instance, well, at least XR. I mean, I suppose strictly he's been kicked out of XR in the UK. But as Hugh pointed out, in terms of their demands to government, they're appealing to the same authority system that uh, by expecting the authority system to do something different or change, they're still supporting it. They're still supporting some kind of top-down, hierarchical thing that it essentially just maintains the status quo in a different form. But the interesting thing was Hugh said that when he came back from the meeting with Faulty and Blondie, he said that they were both absolute doomers and completely got the fact that we were completely screwed and there was no way around that. And yet continue on this pathway that seems to, that supports these apparently supports the green business as usual agenda. And so, there appears to be a contradiction there. And I mean, Sophie and I didn't address that kind of thing with them when we were talking to them just the other day because, well, it wasn't really the purpose of the call, and we didn't want to get too deeply. We really didn't want to go down the path of challenging what they were on about.
Well, do you know what I'm thinking, Barry? You introduced this meeting by saying that we're going to talk about the flipping and that the movie Don't Look Up might have taken a sort of precedence of and suddenly might be a better. I'm not putting it right the way you said it anyway, but everybody heard what you said, and then you said that the war took our attention and that the flipping is also taking a little bit backstage at the moment, but it's the same. I mean, what I see in this Don't Look Up thing is not what everybody was talking about, like the climate thing or whatever. I think what Bob is saying is that the elephant in the room is the civilization, and you don't look up to the civilization. You don't look up at that. It's the thing that you don't question. And when Bob is saying this about a little bunch of people on the internet or in the woods, like the likes of some people who have gone to live off grid, like Mark Boyle or some people around that I know, or else Deep Green Resistance, Uncle Ted, but all that is as a little bunch of people in the world. Nobody wants to look up to big civilization. No. And even for ourselves, it's a challenge. So we can only make our voice heard because we're using the internet.
Yes, it's just even the idea, like I couldn't be further away personally from actually being in an uncivilized state. I'm a city boy living in a city, doing city things, and even though I've sort of chosen to not participate in certain things that are taken for granted, like using cars and aeroplanes as much as possible, like I don't even know how to conceptualize like doing something outside of civilization, but I get the idea that civilization is like the problem, and in terms of having to confront the consequences of climate change and pollution and whatever the shit show humanity's created, understanding, of course, civilization is a major problem. Even just the idea of that, it seems like completely obvious to me. And at the same time, it's, again, even to discuss that with anybody outside of this like tiny little circle of people, or again, outside of the likes of Derek Jensen and so on. There's a couple of, sort of Amprim types who are open to this idea. But it surprises me how incredibly well conditioned everyone is. That, as you're saying, they don't look up. It's like, well, it's really the analogy of the fish not knowing about the water, and to sort of question, oh yeah, what is this all about? And you know, I do contemplate myself like, okay, well, if I found myself not in civilization as an individual, it's almost like a meaningless thing to contemplate, because I don't go camping much, or I don't, you know, if I go in nature, my personal experience in the United Kingdom is that I see a sort of wasteland of this place that used to be a forest, and then you know, some over the last few thousand years they've chopped down every single tree on this island to make eventually ships and whatever they did with it. So I don't know, I just see this like already weird landscape. I can't imagine what being without civilization would be. And at the same time, it's like, well, invariably, I think well, some of us are probably going to find out what it's like, and maybe it'll be like a some sort of Mad Max type of reality, or you know, maybe there will be a scenario where there's the collapse that we like to talk about, you know, occurs, where the economy ceases to function and electricity ceases to function, but maybe there's some strange scenarios where people still get to use petrol engines, or you know, using, you know, I don't know that civilization will completely end like this. Yeah, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, I was going to use the fish tank and the water metaphor, but you did it before me, so I'll just say something else about water. So 8 years ago, I was up in the forests above Norway, and when I needed a break and the guy I met needed a break, we had a chat and a cigarette. And this guy was working the waterworks for Oslo, so he was going around making sure that no trees or branches got stuck in the thing, you know. So yeah, so basically he was a worker for the Oslo waterworks. And I was far into the collapse literature and reading about that kind of stuff. So I asked him directly, you know, on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon or something, how long, if there is a collapse of society in Oslo, how long after that day it collapses can we still drink the water? And he said, well, about a day, 1.5 days. So basically, even though you think that getting clean water from the lakes down to the taps in the city is an easy thing and doesn't require chemicals or workers or human you know, supervision, it actually does. And so you basically break down the entire water supply in a city like Oslo or London within a day or two. Then you can no longer drink the tap water. And so those kinds of things are quite interesting, I think, because it's we don't think about how much goes into just getting that water down to the tap, I think.
But I think it's
Yeah,
not just,
yeah.
it's not just about practical things like water. Civilization is we're talking about a totally different way of thinking. We're talking about if the end of our civilization doesn't just mean the end of water and the tap in the water in the taps. It doesn't mean the end of electricity. It goes to much deeper thing, and it goes back again to spiritual aspect of our connection with the world, with nature, our connection with everything, our non-duality. And that's why I think that it's so difficult to grasp by a lot of people nowadays. I think it would have been easier to talk about this a few hundred years ago, in a world that was not so equipped with technology. But civilization is not just technology. That's my
No, for sure. But you know, if you talk about spirituality, and I totally agree. But the thing about the tap water, the practical thing is that decides where you can be spiritual. Because after the tap water goes, you can no longer be spiritual in the city center. You have to go up in the mountains to be spiritual, even. So that's my point.
Yeah.
I'd like to, yeah, I was going to use the same metaphor about the fish in the water. Civilization for a lot of us, well, for all of us, that's all we've known. So unless we've really stopped to question why are things spiraling worse and worse, we're gonna not, it's what we know. And also to Sophie's point about the machine, I'm just thinking that somehow it kind of relates to this trend or desire of the globalists to have centralized control of everything, and including um, introducing like digital currencies or social credit systems. So I'm just thinking that it is such a big effort, and it's very full of pride and hubris for them to think that they can control everything. It's like the meta alien cortex. So a part of me believes that they will fail, and that I see as part of our resistance is to resist that centralization as much as possible by concentrating on the local. And as Lord Hugh and Mike repeated to us a couple of meetings ago, it's the removal of intermediaries, that as much as we can, um, we deal directly with our needs, which is like Bob said, it's almost impossible in city life, but still you can do little things. Provide part of your food from local suppliers, local gardens, get to know your farmers. But yeah, so to me, resistance is resisting the centralized aims of the elite. So when Sophie talks of the machine, that's what I think of, because it's almost like they're so proud and they cannot see that they cannot control everything, and that things are running away from their control. If we notice that leaders don't seem to think too much or think ahead, maybe that's what it is. Like they can't really control it anymore because it's like a big snowball that is rolling down the mountain already.
Well, maybe there's some that are like, uh, you know, have good intentions, but it just seems to me like the Draculas that control the financial system, the guys that really run this show, are probably going to try to ensure the system collapses from the bottom up. So all the poorest people die first, and then it steadily makes its way up to the rich nations. I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that's kind of the plan for their managed extinction, but I don't know. I just, have nightmares about this stuff.
I
Yeah,
wonder at
we're
this.
dispensable.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm just thinking while you're talking there is, you know, uh, you've got this tension between the digital globalization and AI and transhumanism and all this very rarefied high tech control thing that's going on. And I kind of wonder whether the degree and intensity with which that is being clung to is a measure of just um, how close fragmentation and collapse of society is. In other words, that they're getting extremely desperate and they're holding on even tighter because if you look at the way things are going now with impending economic collapse, loss of food security, environmental, um, you know, weather destructions and all the rest of it, it looks like things are falling apart quicker than these people are going to be able to hold them together for their own purposes. So there's that point. I want to just go back what Torstein said about Oslo's days. You know, a clean water supply is only going to survive for a day or so if it's not managed. Because there's been some things recently. You've probably seen, YouTube videos. Oh, there's only 50 days food supply left in the world. We're all screwed and all the rest of it. And very likely there's a lot of truth in that. But I can remember several years ago reading about there is a website